is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass.
Run down! Run down!
Good morning, I am Carrie Saldo. This is a special edition of The Rundown where we're taking a deep dive look at higher education. The 413 is home to numerous colleges and universities. It's a vital part of the economy and the social fabric here and statewide. And this is a challenging time for higher ed. As institutions are closing, we saw Simon's Rock in the Berkshires. More recently, Hampshire College will be on that list soon. And those that remain face increasing scrutiny over whether college degrees hold the value that they once did. Here to help me delve into this, today's Rundown panel, Laura Colarusso, the editor of Commonwealth Beacon. Good morning. Recent graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she studied journalism and public policy, Lucy Postera. And Phil Bishop, a reporter with the NEPM newsroom. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you have thoughts, you can email the rundown at nepm.org. That's the rundown at nepm.org. All right, let's get right into it. Inside the most educated state in the U.S., where nearly half of all adults have a bachelor's degree or higher. That was a recent headline reported by Christine Villaro out of the Business Insider, which recently ranked the most and least educated U.S. states based on the share of adults 25 and older with a bachelor's degree or higher. Using 2024 census data, Massachusetts ranked highest with 48.3% of adults holding a bachelor's degree or higher. It also had the highest share of adults with advanced degrees, with 22.6% of people having a professional graduate degree. All right, so we're just going to use this as a little bit of a table setter here. Laura, I'll start with you. How do you think that this influences the place that we all call home?
Well, I think that it makes us a state that not only are we the most educated, but also one of the most expensive states to live in, because the higher education stats that you just cited mean that we also make a lot more money, which fuels the economy, which in turn makes it much more expensive. And so as we go...
It's this crazy little cat chasing its own tail in some ways.
In some ways, yes. And I think that's also why this political season, as we head to the gubernatorial election in particular, affordability is one of the key issues on the docket that the candidates are speaking to.
Absolutely. Lucy, you graduated from here in the 413. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You received your degree from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. You have a BA in journalism and a master's degree in public policy. Why was it important for you to get both of those degrees? And you did it in pretty short form, right?
Yes. So I did these degrees in 4 years. A big part of me finishing my undergrad in 3 was the cost. You know, I'm a first-gen college student, so education's always been a big priority of mine, but it is also a big investment. So, you know, getting that degree done in 3 years, the priority was to get it done with no student loans, which was obtainable. And then going on to UMass for my master's degree was also a financial consideration for me. You know, getting a master's degree, I was told I'm going to have more opportunities, as well as the opportunity to make more money in the state of Massachusetts. Like you said, it is highly educated, but it's also very expensive. Mm-hmm. So getting that degree, a main priority of mine was being able to find opportunities that are going to allow me to stay here.
And we'll talk a little bit more about those opportunities later in the show. A broader context here, college degrees and the business associated with them are a significant part of the economy, as we're talking about here. Some stats care of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Higher education institutions contribute more than $70 billion with a B to the economy and generate 474,000 jobs. Meanwhile, over the past dozen years, we've seen 17 colleges and universities in Massachusetts close. That's according to Mass Live. Among them, Simon's Rock College in the Berkshires last year folded its Great Barrington campus into the New York State campus, so no longer active there in the Berkshires. And obviously big news this year, the fact that Hampshire College will be closing later this year. So knowing that this is a significant piece of the economic puzzle here in the state, Phil, and yet we've seen these closures, what's top of mind for you?
I think that, you know, for me, when we talk about its relationship to the broader economy in the state, it's also kind of looking at how these institutions have expanded and grown their capacity to have employees. I think a big thing that we see, particularly from UMass, Amherst, and other colleges, is they also have a really robust research economy. You know, there are people who are working with various state and federal grants to perform research. And I think that, you know, to square the circle between the impact that these institutions have on our economy, and also that we're seeing some of these things close, is that I think that there are broader economic headwinds that sort of are affecting everybody, every person, every institution in the state and across the country. You need a bulwark to be able to weather that. So, larger institutions like UMass Amherst, for instance, which obviously has, as a public university, has a state funding stream to sort of make it a lot more resilient to increase costs. That can weather that storm much better than something like, say, Hampshire College, which had, disappointing enrollment is the language that I will use. A college's ability to maintain itself requires a legitimate funding stream. And for a lot of these colleges, that is enrollment. That is people paying money to go there. So when you have these smaller liberal arts colleges that maybe do not have the enrollment that is necessary to cover the costs that they have to operate as a college or university, then you find yourself in a Hampshire College position where you say, I don't have enough money to keep doing this and I need to close down. And
interestingly, among the things we were hearing from Hampshire College and Simon's Rock College as well, is part of their value proposition was, we're different. Right? Mm-hmm. You can come here, you can get a unique educational experience. It's not going to be your run-of-the-mill experience, maybe with Hampshire College, in the form of not having formal grades. Simon's Rock was an early college, so you could feed in at a younger age in high school. And for a long time, education experts were saying, push that, lean into that. And we saw that that wasn't as helpful. Just one more stat here from Pew Research. 70% of Americans now say the higher education system in the United States is generally going in the wrong direction. That's up 56% from in 2020. Gallup reported last September that 35% of Americans regarded a college education as, quote, very important. Half the number who thought that in 2013. So obviously huge shifts in how people are perceiving the value of higher education. All right, let's discuss some of the ways that Massachusetts leaders have incentivized college. 2- and 4-year college degrees at state schools are now free or low cost for many people in Massachusetts. And let's look at some of the pros and cons here. Initially, the state launched this program in 2023, kind of tweaked it a little bit, widened it in 2024. Mass Educate, Mass Reconnect, those are the buzzwords attached to it. Basically, you break it down, it means that Massachusetts residents without a bachelor's degree can attend any of the state's 15 community colleges, no tuition or fees, and both programs include an allowance for books and supplies for certain students. Now, Lucy, interestingly, sort of part of this free college push is some early college education as well. You also participated in that program. So then how did that fold into your educational experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I was part of the GCC, Greenfield Community College Early Entry Program during the 2021-2022 school year. So this was during my senior year of high school. I was really interested in doing GCC to kind of try out college. As a first gen, I wasn't sure that college was going to be something in the cards for me, that I wanted to go to college. I didn't have anyone to look to say, hey, what is college going to do for me? How is it gonna set me up to have a successful future? So going to college with no cost was really beneficial in learning that education is something that I wanted to invest in. And it also gave me the opportunity to get a little bit ahead and therefore be able to complete my undergrad in 3 years.
Wow. So you mentioned Greenfield. We also have Berkshire Community College, Springfield Technical Community College, Holyoke Community College. I think I hit them all out here in Western Mass. Liz Nieslas, though, of GBH News, reporting in 2024 that the state's program here meant a 40% surge in enrollment after about a decade of declining enrollment in these community colleges. Laura, what are some of the thoughts for you on the positive impacts of opening up these free programs to residents here in Massachusetts?
Sure. Well, if you look at any of the data sets, whether you're looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the National Center for Education Statistics, even Massachusetts data all show that the more education you get, the more economic prospect you have, right? And so people who have an associate's degree have a much better chance of making more money than people who have some level of college or just a high school education. And I don't say just a high school education pejoratively, I just mean that in terms of...
the hierarchy.
The hierarchy,
we're discussing
yes.
Here.
So the more education you have, the more money you're able to make, the better you are set up for your future success. So I think that's a really important point. And I think, as we talk about the role that higher education plays in our economy, that means that there are more people also available for high-tech industry jobs. And so I think it's not a coincidence that, the state that relies on, we have a huge, we used to have a huge biomedical engineering field. Higher education is a huge field for us, that this state needs educated workers to fuel its economy.
Absolutely. Governor Healey's administration found that 5 years after graduation, graduates of Massachusetts public colleges or universities make $20,000 to $30,000 more per year than their peers, to support what you were saying there, Laura, and that those who pursue these fields like health sciences, STEM, and the trades saw a bigger earnings boost. But not everybody loves these programs.
Right.
Rob McCarran, the president of the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, told GBH's Kirk Carapezza in 2024, quote, "State policy should support all the different pathways that are available for students to obtain their degrees, whether at a community college or a 2 or 4 year institution, public or private." Yeah. Phil Bishop, perhaps not surprisingly, given Mr. McCarran's affiliations, but what do you make of what he's saying?
I certainly understand, there are various pathways to achieving the types of higher education that, lead to better economic outcomes for people. I think it's not surprising that the state is looking. I think community college is the most accessible part of that ecosystem. We talk about, and I'm sure we'll touch on it further, but college is expensive. It's an investment, exactly what Lucy said, and there are lots of people who don't have the money to invest in that, or they don't have the time that they can invest in that because they have to focus on other things in their adult life, like a job, like working to make money. College is a time and money intensive process, and I think it's not surprising that the state wanted to utilize community college as the stepping stone for a lot of people because of its accessibility, because it is a very open environment where there aren't even a lot of the social expectations or the financial expectations. If you go to a 4-year college and you're spending lots of money, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to complete that experience and ensure that you are getting a return on your investment. So I think that I can understand the idea, from some of these other universities who might feel maybe left behind as the state is pushing things like free community college, but I do think that is the most accessible avenue for all people in Massachusetts.
Can I just jump in here real quick? Please. Because I think what he's speaking to is the zero-sum game of the number of college students that are out there. So if more are going to community college, fewer are going to 4-year universities or colleges. And, we've had this demographic drop-off of students, of just the number of 18-year-olds in this country. And so part of the reason why we're seeing these closures is that there aren't as many students in the pool. And then when you start to funnel some towards community college, that means that there are less for 4-year degree schools that are more expensive. And really, like you were saying earlier, Phil, they need those tuition dollars to sustain themselves.
Yes, they do.
Absolutely. And the competition becomes pretty fierce in terms of different incentives that some colleges are offering. I think I saw on the Daily Show not that long ago, and this isn't particularly relevant to Massachusetts specifically, but wider, incentives that include fancy swimming pools or high-tech dorms or all these other things that, one, drive costs for those attending there, but also they're sort of being dangled as these carrots for students to come and utilize while they're there. Talking about completion rates, right? The National Center for Education Statistics said that as of 2020, just 64% of students had completed a bachelor's degree at the same institution where they started in 2014. So that's a 6-year gap, right? We're talking about 4-year degrees, maybe or maybe not being completed in that 6-year window. And that 6-year graduation rate was 63% at public institutions, 68% at private nonprofit institutions, and then 29% at private for-profit institutions. So I think I raise those to point out that you might have this collegiate experience, but at the end of the day, not have the piece of paper that says, yep, I completed this, but you end up with the debt anyway. So this is another level of challenge within this entire very complicated issue. Not that I have a solution for it as of yet, but I just think it's something else to add into the fold. Any final thoughts before we head to a quick break here?
I will say, with a little bit of personal experience, my initial college experience was I went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst for 4 years, and I did not graduate. I went from 2016 to 2020. 2020 was the pandemic, and there were a lot of outsized financial pressures on top of the academic pressures as we were heading into the pandemic that led me to lose focus on my academics because I had to focus on my financial well-being, paying my rent, and I'm exactly in that position. I have lots of debt and I don't have the piece of paper, and I think that is a function of being able to support students that have, outside financial pressures. People work through college, people attempt to, kind of balance out their budget as they are doing this very expensive thing. And I do think that it is necessary to kind of get those type of completion rates up is to understand those other pressures and figure out ways to alleviate those, as well as, the entry cost for universities.
So many different paths here.
I think that it was in Liz's piece that you just cited where she noted that as community college enrollment went up, so did the demand on the food banks at the community colleges. And so there's a definite financial pressure there.
Absolutely. All right. More ahead here on the rundown, our panel's thoughts on the costs associated with attending a private college or university and whether or how students will swing that, and especially at a time when federal borrowing limits are about to decrease, and what a thawing job market might mean for recent and future graduates. You're listening to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. Stay with us. Welcome back to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm joined back in studio by journalist Laura Colarusso and Phil Bishop, as well as recent University of Massachusetts Amherst graduate Lucy Postera. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get right back into it. We're going to discuss the cost of a college education if you choose to pursue a private college or university. A recent headline in the Boston Globe: these 14 New England colleges now cost more than $100,000 a year. This is by Claire Thornton. New England states, particularly Massachusetts, are home to many of the top-ranked research universities and liberal arts colleges in the country. The prestige long associated with getting a diploma from one of these schools can come with a jaw-dropping price tag. The cost of attendance up for the 2026-2027 school year, as I mentioned, more than $100,000 at more than a dozen colleges and universities in New England, according to prices for tuition, on-campus housing, assorted fees listed on the school's websites. For our money here in Western Mass, included in that list, Smith, Amherst, and Williams colleges. And then add to that whether or not you have to pay for health insurance outside of that, and textbooks, other personal expenses,
all that other
travel costs, all that life stuff, right? Now, I zeroed in here on the most expensive, and obviously it's important to point out that there are other educational options that do not cost $100,000 a year, but they are still, those prices are ticking up. Lucy, you recently graduated. How much did you and or your friends talk about costs associated with going to school?
I would say pretty constantly. A commonality between me and most of my peers is that UMass was chosen in major because of the cost. When applying to colleges my senior year of high school, cost was the number one thing I was looking at. I was looking at how I can get my degree in the least amount of money possible. And I think as, the job market stays a little bit stagnant and prices are raising, it's something that me and my friends talked a lot about our senior year is, the costs in our student loans versus the future, what we're going to get out of this degree and how it's going to compare to the money that was spent on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, as a parent,
Yes.
I think about this all the time. I have a son. What is college going to look like? If college is going to look like anything, when you hear these prices, what do you think?
Well, I was thinking to myself, I know we're not allowed to swear. But hot insert expletive here. I'm very worried about how much it's going to cost. I was, as you were rattling off the colleges and the numbers, I was thinking to myself, in some areas of the country, you could buy a house for the amount of money you will spend on college. And, my children aren't close to going yet. So in however many years it'll take them to get there, it'll be that much more expensive. I hear Lucy's point, so I feel it so deeply. Like, what is the trade-off? What is the value of the money you're putting into it? Because, we're talking about the top end here, but I think every single pathway is more expensive now, whether you're talking about a state school, whether you're talking about community college, it's all more expensive. And, when we think about that value and why I'm trying to think about how to articulate this succinctly for a radio audience. But as we think about how much we put into this as a society, the cost of educating people to move into their jobs, into their lives, into the middle class, it used to be that a high school education would afford you that. And that was, of course, a cost basically borne by society. And now we're shifting that cost to individuals and their families. And I think that is part of where the difficulty and the narrative that's starting to surround college and higher education, that it's maybe not worth it, is that's really might be part of where it's springing from.
I was looking back on an interview I did about a decade ago for Connecting Point, which is a public television show, and I was talking with an education expert who was talking about the challenge of college readiness. So we might be getting students, and this is a decade ago. Graduation rates were up in Springfield. That was being celebrated. However, those students, if and when they were going on to college, were finding themselves paying for remedial courses that they should have completed and executed in high school. So there again is this other potential way that you're getting squished and squeezed, where you're paying for something that maybe should have been free as part of your public education. It's all so interconnected and complicated. Phil, what comes to mind for you with this, other than I'm not there anymore?
It's true. I've largely moved past that point in my life. I mean, I think, and this is where I might get a little woo-woo about all of this, but I mean, I think that education is very fundamentally important. When we talk about the value proposition of college, it is ultimately a bit of an industrialist perspective. What is the return on my investment? But I think that there's an extremely valuable part of higher education, which is learning and understanding critical thinking and the perception of the world around you through like literature and maybe art or maybe philosophy. A lot of the things that 15 years ago were already getting dunked on as the stuff that you shouldn't be doing in college because they're not going to make you a bunch of money afterwards. And I think that a lot of these hyper expensive colleges, it creates this huge barrier we talk about how being educated, it leads to better economic outcomes. It can propel you into the middle class. It can propel you into positions where you have the ability to maybe build wealth. And to lock those opportunities behind already huge paywalls, I think is a huge detriment to our ability to make a cohesive and, economically stable population of people.
Well, in different ways that college and universities are addressing this directly. Yale, perhaps, for instance, announced in January that it's not going to charge tuition to undergraduates with families who are making less than $200,000 annually. I point out Yale because it's just a relatively recent example, but there's other colleges too. There's colleges looking at different ways to approach financial aid, simplifying the process for students. There's also affordability as a recruitment strategy. These schools are simplifying the financial aid offers to help maybe the idea of locking in tuition rates. So you're entering at point A, and when you graduate in 4 or 6 years, you're guaranteed that wouldn't have increased over that period of time. But this also all coincides with the fact that federal loan caps are going to be blown up. I don't think that is too understating the problem too much. Amy Fan, the New York Times, reporting that the end of a 20-year era in the student loan policy is happening this fall. More students will need to find private loans, making access to credit an important factor in determining who can afford graduate programs. And they go on to say that because of the major policy bill signed by President Trump last year that capped federal student loans for most graduate schools at $20,500 a year. A few graduate programs in fields like medicine, dentistry, law, that'll be $50,000 cap there. But even then, those limits aren't enough in many cases. Laura, what are you keeping an eye on here?
Yeah, I think of two things actually when we talk about this. One is student loan debt is a problem, and so their stated goal for this is to
rein it
in and release people from that burden. The flip side of that is, though, student loans, federal student loans specifically, tend to be less expensive. They tend to be more fairly adjudicated. So by not having this available to a broad swath of the population, what does that do to the racial and socioeconomic makeup of these colleges and universities and programs? And so I think it's there's a double-edged sword here potentially. Yeah. And obviously, we don't know. The data won't this is going to be a very lagging indicator. We haven't started the program yet, but
that is one
I
of
think
the
it's a
driving
question.
concerns, that only the wealthiest folks are going to be able to afford these programs potentially. But to your point, the Trump administration said the lower cost of college is supposed to make student loan payment easier, and they added that it's an important step toward implementing what it calls historic reforms contained in the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. All right, some next steps here, if you're kind of looking at this whole tuition quagmire, there is a website that can kind of help you calculate what the cost might be. It is called myintuition.org.
I'm afraid to go there.
I like
Especially,
the wordplay.
does it look at what it will cost 10 years from now when I'm
Exactly.
putting my kid there? All right, on to our final topic, which is sort of, some people would say, if we're less philosophical argument, but the point of education, right? Getting a job that's going to help you afford a life that is comfortable. A June headline in the New York Times, labor market shifts into a higher gear. This was out of a different publication, the Boston Globe. Shifts into a higher gear as it pulls more people into work. Lucy, you're the most recent into the job market here. You told me you applied for 100 jobs
Yes.
and got 2 interviews. You're currently working on a state reps race here in Western Mass.
am.
But what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I would say it was extremely discouraging. You know, as I had said, a big part of me going to graduate school was to become more employable, to set myself up for success. So I started my job search in probably January of this year and started really hitting the ground running. And I had to give myself breaks. You know, you apply to so many jobs and you're not hearing back. It is a bit discouraging. You're wondering, what am I doing wrong? How could I have set myself up better? And I think you also have to think about what kind of jobs are on the market. There is jobs available, but oftentimes they're not jobs that are entry level, or they're not jobs that require a college degree. So you're either needing additional schooling, or you're getting a job that's really, like we talk about, return on investment. It's not returning to match the money that you put into it.
Laura, you're an editor. You're vetting candidates. What's it like out there right now, receiving applications and going through this process?
It is, well, over time, as the journalism industry has contracted, it's become a lot more competitive on our end. We have more applications coming in, so we have more applicants to choose from. We do not use AI in our process, and so we are going through and
You're doing it the old-fashioned way.
we are old school for digital publication. I think I don't know what to say other than it's just this, we're looking for the right fit, and people, I read every cover letter that comes in, every resume. For me, the cover letter is the most important thing because I want to see how people are writing. I don't know how applicable that is to other organizations or other industries, but I think it's just a matter of finding the right people. And for us, it's gotten a little bit easier because of the journalism industry contracting. So
Yeah. U.S. employers added a surprisingly strong 172,000 jobs in May, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported. And Massachusetts, nominally on the upswing here, in the year through April, Massachusetts gained 10,600 jobs after shedding a combined 4,500 in 2024 and 2025, according to the Boston Globe. Phil, what do you make of the timing here, given that we've got high school and college graduates coming to the job market, in addition to folks who might already be out there looking for work?
I think the biggest thing that broadly kind of colors the environment here is that we did have a job market that was explicitly balanced in preference to workers like 5 years ago. Like the way that the pandemic played out and the way that it disrupted the economy is that we all learned really quickly that workers are very important and you need them to do things. And as things were getting disrupted, that gave workers a lot of power to be like, okay, well, I'm going to move here. I'm going to get a higher pay, move to a better paying job. And I think as the market has contracted and become more competitive, that it makes it feel a lot more demoralizing because you don't have the opportunities to move to a higher paying position, and ultimately you just don't have the power that you maybe once did as a worker. The employers have a bit more of that leverage.
I was just going to say that, and it cuts across different industries, right? So the reason we have the bump is because of the healthcare industry hiring, right? But other industries like the college and higher ed sector are struggling.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it here today. My thanks to all of you. My thanks to those of you listening. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM.